This is a walkthrough of the cover traffic economic model and explains how your rewards are calculated. So your expected rewards are simply the probability of you earning cover traffic rewards multiplied by the budget for that time period. So you want to maximize your probability of earning cover traffic rewards, and let's look at the model and see how you can do that. So your probability of earning rewards depends on this amount you've staked divided by how much everyone else on the network has staked. So let's pretend the transformation function is just 1-to-1 for now. If you staked 50, WX-Hopper on your node, and all of the other nodes in the network combined have staked 50, there's 100 total stake on the network. You have half of it. Your probability is 0.5, so you'll get half of all the rewards for that time period. Say the time period is a month and there's a million Hopper, you'd get 500,000 as rewards. That's if the staking function was 1-to-1. So your transform stake is not actually equal to your stake. So the 50 you stake might not actually be worth 50. It might be worth 55, 100, 25. And the 50 other people stake might not be worth 50 either. It might change. So how's transform stake calculated? Well, there's this function right here, which has 3 sections to it, 2 which are on the screen. So there's a few parameters here, but let's look at these ones on the right first. L is the minimum threshold. SC is the upper threshold, and these two determine what function applies to your stake. So say if you stake less than the minimum threshold L, let's say the minimum threshold is 10, the upper threshold is 100. If you only have 5 WX-Hopper in your node, then neither of these functions apply. The 2 on the screen don't apply, and actually your stake is worth nothing. So you have 5 staked, but cover traffic will treat it as if you have 0 staked. That's your transform stake, 0. The next scenario is if you've staked between the minimum threshold L and the upper threshold C. Here this first function applies, which just multiplies your stake X by the parameter A. And if you've staked above C, the second function applies. So the upper threshold, everything you've staked up until the upper threshold is multiplied by A, and then everything you've staked above the upper threshold is has the power function 1 over B applied to it. So let's say the thresholds are 10 and 100 as they were before. If you stake 50 and A, the parameter A is set to 1, your 50 stake is worth a transform stake of 50. But if you've staked 150, your first 100 is worth 100, but that remaining 50 has the power function 1 over B applied to it. Let's say B is worth 2. 50 to the power of a half is roughly 7. So your total stake is worth 107. Even though you've staked 150, cover traffic will treat it as if you've only staked 107. So these aren't the actual parameters. We'll look at the actual parameters now. This section you can read in your own time if you want. It just goes over ticket price and the budget and how many tickets have to be issued, depending on how many people have staked and etc. How many rewards have to be distributed. But that's less important to node runners. What's more important is the parameters. So the first parameter A, the slope coefficient, is actually set to 1. So it's just a straight linear curve when you're staking in between the minimum and upper threshold. This power function B, or the denominator of the exponent, is set to 1.4, which is actually very steep. So the amount you stake above 75,000 is discounted very heavily. It's treated as way less than it actually is. The upper threshold C here is 75,000. The lower threshold is 10,000. The budget is 100,000, and the time period for the budget is 1 month. These are the main parameters. So let's look at some examples. So let's start with this first example where there's 5 nodes in the network. And all of them have staked within the 2 thresholds. They've all staked more than 10,000 and less than 75,000. So what happens? All of the transform stake is equal to A multiplied by their actual stake. A is set to 1. So the transform stake is actually directly equal to the amount they've staked on the network. So let's calculate the rewards. Let's look at node E. So let's take the total transformed stake in the network. 75,000 plus 50, 50, 30, 10,000. That's 215,000. And to calculate how much node E would earn, we do 75,000 divided by 215,000, the total transform stake in the network. And that gives them a probability of 0.34. So it would earn about 34.88% of the total budget for that month. So it would earn about 3,500 per month, which is quite actually high. APR wise, means it earn an APR about 55%. So now let's look at an example where someone goes above the upper threshold. Let's say node E decides I want to stake 25,000 more, and I'm going to stake it on the same node. So now he has 100,000 staked, which means he now has a second function applied to his stake. So if we look at that here, that first 75,000 he had staked, which is below the upper threshold, to C, is just multiplied by A, and then you do 100,000 minus C, 75,000. That extra 25,000 he staked above the upper threshold, we times it or apply the power function 1 over 1.4. So let's do that here. So if you do 25,000 to the power of 1 over 1.4, you get 1,384, which is a lot less than 25,000. You add 75,000 to that number, and you get his transform stake of 76,384. So that's a lot less than 100,000. And if you are staking above the upper threshold, you are penalized to a degree. It's disincentivized, and your transform stake is lower than the actual amount you've staked. But it is still higher. So that 25,000 is worth something. So he still does have an extra 1,300 additional transform stake. This increases his total rewards, but reduces APR. He's staking more to earn less percentage-wise. And what's important to note is he's actually reducing the total earnings of everyone else on the network. So here, this person had 4.65% of the total rewards. Now he only has 4.62, and that's because the total transform stake in the network has gone up. So there's an extra 1,300 transform stake in the network. It's no longer 10,000 divided by 215,000. It's 10,000 divided by 216,300. So what should node E actually do? Because it's disincentivized to stake above the upper threshold, so what's optimal for him? The best move is actually to open another node. So if node E creates node F, or the person running node E creates a separate node and puts the 25,000 on node F, his 100,000 is split between two nodes and is actually worth 100,000 now. So let's calculate his rewards again. He has 100,000 staked, but the network now has 240,000 on it. So his rewards would become 100,000 divided by 240,000, which is 41% of the total budget between two nodes, 31 here, 10 here. You multiply that by the budget of 100,000, and he's earning about 4,100 a month, which gives him a much better APR. But the APR of everyone on the network has gone down just because the transform stake's higher and everyone else is earning a little bit less, while the budget remains the same. It's split a little more. So why do we have such a high B parameter? Why do we disincentivize staking above the upper threshold? Or how heavily do we actually disincentivize it? Well, imagine a whale enters the network, node G, and he brings in 10 million WX HOPR into the network. So we do the same thing. He's staking above the upper threshold. So we apply the transformation function to it, the second one. His first 75,000 is worth 75,000. His remaining 9,925,000, we apply the power function 1 over 1.42, and it's worth about 99,000 WX Hopper. So his stake is worth about 99,000 plus 75,000, 174,000 Hopper. The cover traffic app actually treats it as if he's only staked about 175,000 when he staked 10 million. That's a pretty sharp decrease. So Node E initially, when he staked that extra 25,000, it was worth 1,300 extra. But because the power function is so high, the curve flattens off very heavily. So you might stake 20,000 extra above 75,000 to earn an extra 1,000 transform stake. But after that, you have to stake 50,000 or 100,000 or a million. So it gets to the point where you're staking 100, 150,000 and you only earn an extra 1,000 transform stake. So with such a high parameter, we disincentivize staking on one node extremely heavily. So if you reduce the parameter B from 1.4 to 1.1, and you discounted him with the power function 1 over 1.1, his stake would be worth 2.3 million. And now everyone else, his rewards go down very, very heavily. But what's worse is that now he has 90% of the total rewards in the network. So one person just puts a huge stake in, and now they're receiving all the cover traffic on the network, and this is very undecentralized or more so centralized. And it's also bad for privacy. Overall, the Hopper privacy mixnet relies on decentralization to a degree, and what's much better for the network is that people stake their stake across nodes. So it's not wrong for this guy to add 10 million to the network, but we don't want him to have it all on one single node, which is going to take up all the traffic. Someone's observing the network. Now they're seeing all the traffic go to one node. It's much better that he opens however many nodes it takes for him to stake that more efficiently, and helps Hopper build a decentralized network.